It was a quiet, sunny afternoon when my disabled daughter, who had always been terrified of loud noises, found herself locked inside a cage. But this time, it wasn't her in danger. The person responsible, a woman from the HOA who'd made our lives miserable for months, was now facing criminal charges. The whole situation had taken a turn no one could have predicted, and the way it all ended? Completely shocking. We had just settled into our new home, a modest house in a suburban neighborhood that promised peace and tranquility. After years of moving from one place to another because of my job, I thought it was finally time to put down roots. This new house was supposed to be a fresh start for all of us, especially for my daughter, who had always struggled to find stability. My daughter is the heart of our family. She lives with a rare disability that affects both her mobility and her ability to communicate. Routine was everything to her. It gave her a sense of control in a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable. Every day was carefully planned. Therapy sessions, the way her room was arranged, even the smallest details mattered. Our home had to be a sanctuary, a place where she could feel safe and comfortable. I didn't want any distractions or complications. The neighborhood seemed perfect at first. It had a reputation for being well kept, with friendly neighbors and families who genuinely cared about the community. The HOA, Homeowners Association, was a big part of that image. They were in charge of making sure everyone followed the rules and that the neighborhood stayed in line. At first, I didn't think much of them. I saw them as just a background presence, handling the usual administrative stuff without really affecting our daily lives. But I didn't expect how deeply involved the HOA would become in the most personal parts of our lives. The first time we heard from them was through a letter, a formal welcome to the neighborhood. It listed the HOA's responsibilities and the various rules we were expected to follow, everything from yard maintenance to fence colors. Nothing in that letter raised any red flags. We had no intention of causing trouble or breaking any rules. We just wanted to live peacefully. But things started to change once my daughter's needs became more visible. Because of her disability, we had to make certain accommodations. There was medical equipment, and we often had physical therapy sessions at home. These sessions could sometimes cause noise, but they were absolutely essential for her well-being. We also had a therapy dog who helped her manage anxiety and provided comfort during tough days. We tried to be considerate of our neighbors. We scheduled the therapy sessions during reasonable hours and made sure the dog was well-trained and never a disturbance. Still, I started noticing a neighbor, an older woman, looking at our house with disapproval. She would peer through her window whenever we were outside, often shaking her head. I thought it was just judgmental behavior, the kind of thing you sometimes run into in new places. But one day, she came to my door with a list of complaints. At first, I thought she was just being nosy, but then I realized she was representing the HOA. Our first conversation was polite, though it carried an undercurrent of condescension. She introduced herself as part of the HOA's Community Watch program and told me that our property violated several minor rules, like the visibility of medical equipment from the street and concerns about the therapy dog possibly disturbing others. I was taken aback. These weren't issues mentioned in the welcome letter, and I had assumed we were following all the guidelines. But she was firm. There was a subtle pressure in her tone, a warning that if we didn't comply, there could be consequences. I tried to explain that my daughter's needs weren't optional. The medical equipment was necessary. The dog was part of her care. But my explanations fell on deaf ears. The woman's tone grew colder, as if she were just enforcing policies without considering the human side of the equation. I felt a knot in my stomach, but tried to stay calm, promising to address the concerns. I never imagined that this would be the beginning of a much larger conflict. The HOA, once a faceless entity that seemed harmless, was quickly becoming a source of stress and fear. It wasn't just this one woman, it was the entire organization. And it became clear that they were willing to go to extreme lengths to enforce their rules, no matter the personal cost. Little did I know, this was just the calm before the storm. The HOA, supposedly there to protect and maintain peace, was about to make decisions that would turn our lives upside down. And it all started with a simple neighbor's complaint. Our hopes for a peaceful life were slipping away, but I still didn't realize how dangerous things were about to get. The tension between us and the HOA had been building for weeks. At first, it was subtle, minor complaints, small issues that didn't seem like much. But things escalated quickly. My daughter's therapy sessions required specific equipment, and sometimes we set it up just outside in the yard so she could get sunlight and fresh air, which helped with her recovery. The therapy dog was a constant presence, trained to help her stay calm. Yet these simple, necessary arrangements became a point of contention for the HOA. It all came to a head when HOA Karen, the same woman, knocked on our door with a printed list of what she called violations. I thought it was some kind of misunderstanding. After all, we had been doing our best to follow the rules. The original HOA letter had been long and full of legal jargon, but we had read it carefully. The medical equipment, while maybe not the most attractive sight, was essential. We weren't trying to make a spectacle of our situation, but we also couldn't hide what was necessary for my daughter's care. When I opened the door and saw Karen holding that paper, my first reaction was confusion. I didn't expect it to be this serious. I went through the list in my head, trying to figure out what we could have possibly done wrong. The first complaint? That the medical equipment was visible from the driveway. Second? That the therapy dog was too loud at times. Third? That our yard setup distracted from the neighborhood's aesthetic. Each item was more absurd than the last. It became clear that the HOA wasn't really concerned with maintaining standards. They were obsessed with an image of perfection that ignored the reality of people's lives. I tried to explain calmly that the equipment was vital. I told her how we'd tried to be discreet, how the dog was always well-behaved, and how no actual neighbor had ever complained. But Karen wasn't interested in listening. Instead, she turned the conversation into a demand for immediate compliance. She said the HOA would be sending us a formal notice. Unless we immediately corrected these violations, I could feel the pressure building. But I still didn't believe it would escalate any further. I assumed it was a matter of misunderstanding, and that once I explained everything, we could move on. However, Karen wasn't finished. She didn't just present the violations, she threatened us with fines and said that if we didn't fix the situation within a week, the HOA would begin taking legal action. Her tone was calm but firm, suggesting that this was just the beginning. I began to feel the gravity of the situation. This wasn't simply about enforcing rules. It was about power, control, and the desire to dictate how my family lived in our own home. She made it clear that if we didn't follow the rules to the letter, the HOA would punish us for every little thing they could find. The more I tried to explain, the more Karen dug in. She brushed off my concerns about my daughter's medical condition and treated it as a nuisance, something that could easily be ignored in favor of maintaining community standards. The rules, in her mind, were more important than the people they were supposed to protect. And it wasn't just about medical equipment or the therapy dog anymore. Everything about our life was now under scrutiny. I could sense the disdain in her voice as she referred to my daughter's needs as disruptive to the neighborhood. At this point, I could feel the anger bubbling inside me. I wasn't angry at the HOA's rules. After all, I understood that some order needed to be kept in a neighborhood. But I was furious at the lack of empathy, the complete disregard for what my family was going through. This wasn't a case of minor violations. This was an attack on our right to live in a way that best suited my daughter's needs. My frustration turned to disbelief when Karen threatened to call the police, or even Child Protective Services, if we didn't comply. That was the moment I knew things weren't just about rules anymore. This was personal. It wasn't enough that we were simply being fined or warned. Karen wanted to break us down, to prove her authority at the expense of my family. The conversation became more heated. I tried to keep my voice calm, but the absurdity of it all made it difficult. We exchanged harsh words, but no matter what I said, Karen seemed determined to push her agenda. Her unwavering stance showed that this wasn't just about enforcing rules, it was about establishing dominance over us. She refused to consider any reasoning that didn't align with her view of what the neighborhood should look like. And at that moment, I realized how dangerous this could become. If she could do this over something as trivial as medical equipment, what else could she do? Karen's behavior wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a reflection of the broader culture of the HOA. They weren't interested in the well-being of the residents. They were focused on maintaining a certain image, regardless of the cost to the people living within the community. My daughter's health and comfort meant nothing in their eyes. I had thought that dealing with a simple HOA issue would be a minor inconvenience. But it had turned into a confrontation with the very people who were supposed to uphold the neighborhood's sense of order and peace. Instead, they were creating chaos in my life, threatening my family's security in the most cruel and unjust ways. I never imagined that this would be the moment when everything started to unravel. But the longer the conversation went on, the more I realized that this was only the beginning of something much larger and more dangerous than I could have anticipated. The days that followed the confrontation with the HOA Karen were tense. My mind kept racing, unable to let go of the conversation. I kept thinking about how quickly the situation had escalated. The threats, the warnings, everything had felt like a bad dream. And I couldn't shake the feeling that something much worse was looming on the horizon. Yet I never expected what would happen next. My daughter had always been a source of joy in our home. Despite her disability, she had a remarkable ability to find peace in the smallest things. Her therapy sessions, which were meant to help her cope with her condition, often took place in the yard where she could feel the warmth of the sun on her skin and listen to the soft sounds of nature. The therapy dog was an integral part of her treatment, offering comfort and companionship during these times. The two of them had formed a bond that was nothing short of beautiful. It wasn't just a dog, it was her friend, her support, and her emotional anchor. On that particular day, my daughter was in the yard with her dog, laughing and playing as she always did. She was a bright, positive soul, and nothing made her happier than her time outdoors. It was a routine for her, one that brought her the relief she so desperately needed. Her laughter echoed through the yard as the dog ran around. I felt a brief sense of relief. The world felt right in that moment. But little did I know, just beyond the walls of our home, things were about to take a turn for the worse. It wasn't long before I received an unexpected phone call from one of my neighbors, a woman I had never spoken to much. Her voice was panicked and urgent as she told me what had happened. I could barely comprehend the words at first, the shock of her message almost too much to process. My daughter, my precious child, had been locked in a cage. A cage. The kind of cage you would find for animals, not for people. My heart immediately dropped into my stomach, and I felt my entire world tilt. The rage and confusion hit me like a tidal wave. How could anyone, especially someone from the HOA, do something so cruel? Karen had crossed a line that could never be undone. The simple act of locking a vulnerable child in a cage was not just an act of cruelty, it was an unforgivable violation of trust, of basic human decency. To make matters worse, the reason behind it was equally appalling. Karen, in her obsession with enforcing the rules, had decided that my daughter's laughter, her playful sounds, were somehow disturbing the peace. In her twisted mind, the joy of a child with special needs was a threat to the harmony of the neighborhood. My daughter, whose condition already made life challenging enough, had been singled out and punished in the cruelest way imaginable. And for what? Because she was simply existing? Because she had the audacity to live her life on her own terms? The thought of it filled me with an overwhelming sense of injustice. How could someone who was supposed to be a representative of the community, someone tasked with keeping things peaceful, turn into the very thing that caused the most harm? As the news sank in, I tried to wrap my mind around the details. Karen must have been aware of my daughter's disability. We had never hidden it. Her medical needs were part of who she was, and anyone who spent any time near our home would have seen it. So, why would Karen do this? It wasn't about enforcing rules anymore. It wasn't about making the neighborhood look pristine. This was personal. She had decided to take matters into her own hands, and she had no regard for the consequences. The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. What kind of person locks a disabled child in a cage and calls it discipline or enforcement of the rules? It wasn't just a violation of HOA policies. It was an assault on my daughter's dignity, her safety, and her right to live without fear. Karen had shown no compassion, no understanding, and certainly no respect for my family. It was clear that this was no longer a simple issue of rules or regulations. What Karen had done wasn't just about enforcing HOA guidelines, it was about power. It was about someone using their position to exert control over others in the most cruel and harmful way possible. In her mind, she held all the cards, and she didn't hesitate to use that power to break a family that was already struggling. I immediately contacted the police. What had happened wasn't just an accident or a misunderstanding. It was an act of violence, plain and simple. It didn't matter that Karen had wrapped it up in the guise of enforcing neighborhood rules. The fact remained that she had endangered my daughter in the most blatant and horrifying way. My daughter wasn't just trapped in a cage physically. She had been trapped in a nightmare that no child should ever have to face. As I waited for the authorities to arrive, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of disbelief and fury. This was a woman who had seen my daughter, who knew about her condition, and still chose to lock her away as though she were some kind of animal. It didn't matter how many rules she thought were being broken. No set of regulations or guidelines could ever justify what had just happened. This was no longer about a neighborhood's rules. This was about human decency, and Karen had shown none of it. The impact of what Karen had done rippled far beyond that moment. What was meant to be a simple confrontation over minor issues had spiraled into something far darker. And now my family was at the center of a storm we never saw coming. The outrage, I felt, was immense. But more than anything, I was filled with a deep sense of protectiveness over my daughter. I couldn't undo what had been done, but I would do everything in my power to make sure Karen paid for what she had done, and that she never had the chance to hurt anyone else again. As soon as I called the police, a mix of relief and dread washed over me. Relief because I knew that what had happened was wrong, and now someone with authority was finally going to take it seriously. Dread because I knew the truth would be difficult to prove, and I feared that Karen, with all her power and authority within the HOA, would find a way to twist the narrative in her favor. I never imagined she would stoop to playing the victim, but that's exactly what happened. Karen, when questioned by the authorities, claimed that she had simply been trying to help my daughter by locking her in the cage. According to her, she thought it was necessary to calm her down when she became too loud. The idea that she could try to justify what she had done with such a flimsy excuse was almost beyond belief. Karen seemed to believe that her position as an HOA member gave her the right to make decisions about how other people should live, especially those who couldn't fight back. There was video footage, clear, undeniable proof that changed everything. One of our neighbors, who had witnessed the entire incident from their window, had recorded everything. The footage showed Karen locking my daughter in the cage and standing there as she cried. The camera captured Karen's cold, detached demeanor, like she had no idea, or worse, no care, about the cruelty she was inflicting. There was no mistaking it. The video was a smoking gun, and it painted a picture of abuse that no one could ignore. But the video wasn't the only piece of evidence. Several other neighbors who had either witnessed the incident or seen the aftermath came forward with statements. One neighbor, a retired nurse, described how she had seen my daughter in distress when she was finally taken out of the cage, and how Karen had refused to let anyone help her. Another neighbor, a local teacher, recalled seeing Karen dragging my daughter by the arm, ignoring her pleas to be let out. Each of these witnesses painted a picture of Karen as someone who wasn't just enforcing rules. She was taking matters into her own hands in a callous and dangerous way. In addition to the testimonies from the neighbors, we also had a professional report from my daughter's therapist, who had been working with her for several months. The therapist had been deeply concerned about the emotional effects of such an incident on my daughter. In the report, they described how her disability required careful handling and how essential it was for her to feel safe and secure at all times. The therapist specifically noted that locking a disabled child in a cage could cause severe emotional trauma and potentially undo months of progress in her treatment. The report was a vital piece of evidence. Not only did it support our claims, but it also highlighted the severity of what Karen had done. Despite Karen's attempts to play the victim and downplay her actions, the weight of the evidence against her was undeniable. The police investigation moved swiftly, and it quickly became clear that Karen's version of events was nothing more than a fabrication designed to cover up her cruelty. Her attempts to justify her actions by claiming she was trying to help rang hollow in light of the facts. The more Karen spoke, the more she dug herself into a hole. The more she tried to explain, the more her lies became apparent. Within days, the investigation progressed to the point where criminal charges were being discussed. The police charged Karen with child endangerment and false imprisonment, serious charges that carried significant legal consequences. The fact that she had locked my daughter in a cage, knowing full well about her disability and the need for careful attention, was a violation of basic human rights. The charge of false imprisonment came from the fact that Karen had confined my daughter against her will without any legal or moral justification. As the investigation continued, the pressure on Karen